On Friday, after the Bureau for Labor Statistics, or BLS, released an unflattering jobs report, Trump announced that he will be firing its commissioner, accusing her of being a Biden political appointee and manipulating the numbers. Unsurprisingly, this has sparked a panic about the apparent politicization of America's economic data. So in this video, we thought we'd take a look at why America's economic data is indeed becoming less reliable, and why this should be a bipartisan concern. Have you ever wondered how much money TLDR makes each year, or who's funding our journalism? Well, we think that transparency is super important, so we answer both questions in our recent video. It's linked in the description. So, let's start by explaining what happened at the end of last week. Last Friday, the BLS published the so-called jobs report, which basically says how many jobs were added to the US economy. The jobs report is closely watched by policymakers and politicians alike, because it's considered to be a reliable indicator as to the strength of the economy, with more jobs generally indicating a strong growing economy, and fewer jobs indicating a weak, possibly recessionary economy. And, well, last Friday's job report was not good. Not only did the US add just 73,000 jobs in July, well below the 115,000 or so forecast, but the BLS also dramatically revised down the figures from the previous 2 months, with June revised down from 147,000 to just 14,000, and May revised down from 144,000 to 19,000. It's hard to overstate how bad this is. If you exclude the pandemic, this is the weakest quarter of job growth since 2010, and if you exclude the healthcare sector, which is constantly adding jobs as the American population ages, job growth was actually flat in July and negative in the previous 2 months. This was pretty embarrassing for Trump. Not only were these numbers bad news in and of themselves, but the administration had frequently touted the past couple of jobs reports, which were dramatically revised down on Friday, as proof that the economy was booming. So on Friday evening, Trump took to Truth Social to announce that he would be firing the incumbent BLS commissioner, Dr. Erica McIntyre, accusing her of faking the statistics and being a Biden political appointee. This is frankly nonsense. While it's true that McIntyre was appointed by Biden, the BLS is essentially just full of hardcore data geeks, and the commissioner is about the most apolitical appointment there is. McIntyre was a long-time civil servant who was confirmed by an 86-8 margin in the Senate, with the vast majority of Republicans, including J.D. Vance, voting yes. Now, Trump and senior members of his team, like Kevin Hassett, argue that the size of the revisions was proof of political interference, but this is also nonsense. For starters, the commissioner doesn't actually compile the data, they just present them to the Department of Labor, and the numbers get revised all the time, with dramatic revisions becoming more likely when the economy is either slowing down or speeding up. And Friday's revisions weren't even that large by historical standards. The June revision was the 44th largest on record, while the May revision was the 56th. That we should see slightly larger than average revisions during times of economic uncertainty is unsurprising. It's also worth noting that the revised BLS data is closer to data from other private sector sources. ADP Research, for instance, reports data on private payrolls and forecasts a net loss of jobs in June. Furthermore, if the BLS really were out to get Trump, you'd expect them to understate the original figures, which would get the most media attention, and then quietly revise them upwards later. This is why, when the numbers were revised down under Biden, instead of claiming that the BLS were out to get the president, as Trump is now doing, Republicans claim that the BLS were helping the president by conveniently overstating the numbers in the first place. Anyway, Trump's firing of McIntyre has led to some anxiety about the reliability of America's economic data. Her replacement will presumably be a more pliant candidate, who's therefore going to be more willing to fudge or delay the numbers to help Trump. And this whole episode risks creating a chilling effect, deterring other civil servants from releasing data that might be unflattering to Trump. But this is far from the first thing that Trump has done to undermine the reliability of America's economic data. For starters, we've already seen other agencies delay reports that might upset Trump. According to Reuters, for instance, in late May, the US Department of Agriculture delayed its quarterly trade outlook report because it blamed a widening agricultural deficit on tariffs, and relevant explanatory text was redacted from the final version. The second reason to worry about the reliability of economic data is that in February and March, Doge disbanded several so-called advisory councils, which are basically councils of experts who help federal statistics agencies, despite the fact that these councils work on a wholly volunteer basis with tiny operating budgets. And thirdly, in April, the IRS announced that it will be sharing data with the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. This came after a relatively innocuous-sounding executive order in March, where Trump announced that his administration will be, quote, eliminating information silos. Getting government agencies to share information with one another sounds like a good idea, and in many cases it is. However, federal statistics agencies have long been siloed from other federal agencies, especially law enforcement agencies, to guarantee reliable data. Just think about it. If the government sent you a survey and you thought your answers might be given to the police or ICE, you'd be less likely to respond, or at least more likely to respond untruthfully. This is why most of these surveys come with a clause saying that your responses will be used, quote, for statistical purposes only. And all of this only compounds pre-existing problems with America's statistical systems. In short, because of both chronic underfunding under both Republican and Democratic administrations, and falling response rates, which reflect the fact that Americans are increasingly unwilling to respond to government surveys, both because they're too busy and because they trust the government less than ever before, the quality of data from the BLS and other federal agencies have been deteriorating since at least the pandemic. For instance, the BLS is increasingly reliant on estimates to calculate inflation, because it can't afford the staffers to go out and get the hard data, and because people don't like letting government employees into their stores in order to get it. The BLS has even given up on collecting data from certain cities entirely, because it just doesn't have enough people. You get the idea then. Trump threatens to both politicize America's economic data and make it even less reliable than it already was. Now, this is bad news for anyone who just likes stats. America used to be the gold standards for government statistics, but it also poses an acute economic risk. Bad data makes it harder for businesses and consumers to make good decisions. And good data is, or was, one of the big reasons that foreigners felt confident investing in the US. This shouldn't be a partisan issue, and international experience doesn't bode well. Firing statisticians is the sort of thing you generally expect from authoritarians, and usually portends economic crisis. Just look at what happened in Turkey. All of this plays into a broader feeling coming out of the US at the moment. At one time, the US seemed to be a steady, stabilizing force in global politics, but it appears that those days are over, with America's influence, popularity, and dominance on the decline. So in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, we're discussing this geopolitical shift, and whether we're currently observing the end of the American order. In that section, we discuss everything from the collapse of democratic norms in the US, to the decline of American soft power, to issues with the US economy, or the battle for universities, before discussing who could potentially take over in a post-American world. So if you want to find out what we really think, now's your chance. It's not just the US though. This issue is our longest ever at 78 pages, full of our very best journalism and analysis. So we also get into why Germany's military might is growing, if Farage could become the UK's next prime minister, why countries are outsourcing their migrants, why the global order is collapsing with Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, and why leaders like Putin and Netanyahu seem to be getting away with it. The magazine has now officially been published, so if you order a copy today, we'll ship it as soon as we can. Or if you select the digital edition, we'll send a digital version of Too Long straight to your inbox. Plus, if you want the very best deal, you should make sure you subscribe to Too Long. That way, not only do you get every issue going forward, but you'll also get 20% off every copy as long as you're a member. On top of that, this week only, if you use code LASTCHANCE20, you'll get an additional 20% off this copy, bringing down the cost from £9.99 to £6.40 for the digital edition, or £13.99 to £8.96 for the physical edition. This really is your last chance too. From next month, all new subscribers won't receive this issue of Too Long, instead having to wait until December's The New Middle East issue. So if you want the reduced subscriber pricing on this issue, this really is your last chance. As we outlined in our recent video on TLDR's finances, TLDR actually made a loss last year, and too long is a big part of our plan to make TLDR profitable in 2025 in order to continue funding the free videos that we make every day. So if you want to be part of that, then head to toolong.news and subscribe today.